All right, we're going to turn now to the war between Israel and Hamas. President Biden. Of course, the latest news that came out is that Israel is denying that its targeted bombing destroyed the hospital in Gaza where hundreds were killed. And the U.S. is saying today that they believe that Israel is not responsible for that. The president is showing his support, and he's also cautioning interference from the rest of the region.
I come to Israel with a single message. You're not alone. You are not alone. As long as the United States stands, and we will stand forever, we'll not let you ever be alone. Most importantly, I know the recent terrorist assault on the people of this nation has left a deep, deep wound. The vast majority of Palestinians are not Hamas. Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people. Hamas uses innocent families in Gaza as human shields, putting their command centers, their weapons, their communications tunnels in residential areas. Palestinian people are suffering greatly as well. We mourn the loss of innocent Palestinian lives like the entire world.
And the global impact of what is happening in Gaza and in Israel is being felt here, of course, in Michigan. So I'm going to bring in now Wayne State University Professor Howard Lupovich and Professor Saeed Khan for some perspective. Gentlemen, it's good to see both of you. Thanks for joining me again.
Thank you for having us.
Professor Khan, let me start with you, and I'm going to go to you, Professor Lupovich, after. The same question is, give us some perspective, since I talked to you both just over a week ago after the war started. What do you feel that we are seeing now, and what is your assessment of the escalation? Let me start with you, Professor Khan.
Well, I think the word escalation, unfortunately, is something that is on everybody's minds. There are a plethora of tanks from the Israeli Defense Forces on the border with Gaza. And since we spoke, there was really what seemed to be the inevitability of a ground offensive into the northern part of Gaza. We don't know when that is going to begin, but we can speculate that now that President Biden has left the region, that might be the eventuality. I think some people were perhaps hoping that with the president's visit to Israel, there might have been some kind of discussion about moving toward a potential ceasefire or some kind of bracketing of the offensive to a level of proportionality, or even say some kind of a plan of action that these benchmarks need to occur. Right now, it's open-ended. We don't really know what's going to occur. The only thing with a certain level of certainty that we have is that it seems as though we're really moving on to a very protracted and brutal military conflict between Hamas and Israel, which unfortunately will have more of an impact on civilian lives than moving the needle on a political solution.
Professor Lupovich, give us your sense of what we've seen transpire here and the escalation.
Well, I agree. I mean, they have to get worse before they get better here. I think, yes, Israel is preparing for a ground offensive. Israel and its government and its military has made very clear that their goal here is really to remove Hamas. And they've been very clear that the problem is Hamas and its policies. I think part of the realization or the reckoning from an Israeli point of view is that what Hamas did last week is not something surprising or unusual, but it's really realizing the goals in their own charter. I mean, they've been promising or aspiring to do just that for decades, and this was the moment where they really tried to do it. Now, as far as this escalation, I agree. I fear this is the direction that it's going. I think that in the past, Israel has tried to contain Hamas through air attacks, and while it had a temporary or limited effect, clearly it has not stopped or slowed Hamas in any way. Hamas is still there, and Hamas is still engaging in the same sort of terrorist actions that it was in the past. And so this more massive ground escalation, ground attack is going to be necessary to accomplish the aim of removing Hamas from Gaza.
Professor Khan, give us your sense of the impact of having President Biden over there. Of course, he was supposed to go to Jordan and meet with leaders and talking about humanitarian aid for the civilians in Gaza. He also gave a little bit of a warning to Iran, saying, quote, be careful. What do you think the impact of his visit there and now heading back is?
Well, if you're looking at the glass half full, then the commitment that he received from Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu that Israel would not resist or oppose humanitarian relief coming into Gaza by way of the Egyptian border, that's definitely a good sign. That's probably the only good sign. I think we have to look at President Biden's trip on the one hand for its optics. It certainly definitely shored up America's support for Israel, which is a longstanding policy matter. But as far as looking at this internationally, I'm afraid that it probably doesn't bode very well. The fact that the president was rebuked with the cancellation of the meeting with King Abdullah II in Jordan, the fact that Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas also rescinded the meeting with President Biden. The fact that Secretary of State Antony Blinken was made to wait overnight to meet with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. These don't bode well for America's standing in the world. And it looks like international opinion, not just public opinion, but also among world leaders, is really questioning America's standing. And you see this when it comes to countries like China and Russia. However one may feel about them, they are important players on the world stage today. And it seems that these kinds of actions just go further in reducing America's standing and credibility as leading, particularly when it comes to peace initiatives.
Professor Luprovich, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair assessment. You know, my colleague, Professor Khan, is always fair, and I agree with that. The one thing I would add is I think it's very important that President Biden said, among other things, that he distinguished Hamas from Palestinians, and he distinguished Hamas from the goal of Palestinian rights and statehood. I think that's very important. I took that to be a kind of call, an invitation, an urging by the president to Palestinians who are not Hamas or not supportive of Hamas. This is a moment to stand up and to say that they disagree with what Hamas is doing. Now, I have heard Palestinian voices do this, but they're few and far between. I mean, this is this is clearly a moment of reckoning for Israel in a lot of ways, but I think also for Palestinians. This is the moment when Palestinians need to ask themselves, are these the values and the people you want leading and guiding the state that you want to create? Or do you want different Palestinian leaders to emerge? I think that's a big question, and I'm glad the president put that on the table. And almost as somewhere between an invitation and a gauntlet to Palestinians, this is the time to say that Hamas does not speak for you or for your aims.
I think what I also wanted to ask both of you about is how we are seeing this conflict playing out, especially also in the use of social media in the graphic images that Israel has released to be able to show what happened, the aftermath of the Hamas attacks, the initial ones. And then also Hamas, even though that they have been banned from multiple social media platforms, have been able to bring their own pictures out in terms of trying to show the world what's happening in Gaza. Professor Khan, talk to me about the power behind the pictures and the dialogue that we're seeing.
Well, I'm afraid, as what we already know about social media, is that it creates silos. And what it does is it also then, unfortunately, leads to more confirmation bias. Each side, respectively, has their pictures, their videos, which they then disseminate to really their own choirs, if you will, preaching to them. And there's also the issue, though, about whether this is really something that is, if it reaches somebody else on the so-called other team, as President Biden used that term today, is it making a difference? Is it making people be skeptical, or are people then dismissing it off as saying, oh, this is fake news, this isn't really happening? There's accusations that some of these images are being generated by AI. I think, Howard, you'd probably agree with me that this is probably the first major conflict in the world that is being played out as much on social media as it is being played out in real time. And we're seeing then the effects of how this is, I think, unfortunately, further calcifying public opinion on one side or the other, and that really crucial central space where people can come together and try to negotiate, try to gain an understanding from one another. That's becoming, unfortunately, elusive.
Yeah, Professor Lupovich, what's your take on that?
Oh, I agree. I mean, I think it's become pretty clear that while social media has potential positive uses, it's become really increasingly a dissemination of basically a platform for hate and outrage, for sure. No question about it. The one thing I would also ask is that social media, it allows information and news to be disseminated before it's verified or vetted. So, for example, it took days for Israel to sort of prove to the world that these babies were killed. But even the slightest inkling that Israel had attacked a hospital in Gaza, even though it's trending, it's looking like that's not what happened, the outrage about it is going to remain even after it's proven to be unsubstantiated and not true. So, once upon a time when we had news, there would be a period where journalists would vet the news, make sure it's substantiated. And when people got it, the news they were getting was news that was verified and substantiated. But now people are getting information that hasn't necessarily been substantiated and drawing conclusions and reacting, even though these reactions and conclusions are premature. I mean, I think the saying is that information is the lowest form of knowledge. Well, we are inundated with the lowest form of knowledge, and there simply is a shortage of reflection, vetting, and just making sure in a very basic way that these things are true and accurate.
Gentlemen, before I let you go, I know that you are going to be speaking together tomorrow at Wayne State University, and we've seen so many demonstrations in colleges and universities across the United States. We've also seen some anti-Semitism as well as on college campuses. People are dealing with what the news is from overseas. Professor Khan, just tell us again when you guys are going to be speaking, and so people can come if they'd like to hear.
Well, actually, tomorrow afternoon, Professor Lupovich and I are doing something for the students of Wayne State University. This is a way for them to try to process information. Hopefully, they can see us as resources, not only of information, but the way that people can talk about these things in a hopefully a civil way, a way that respects not only the other people in the conversation, but also the other perspectives. The idea then of, as you said rightly, people's emotions are totally fraught right now. We see how, unfortunately, there are major upswings of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, some of them even then manifesting themselves with the stabbing murder of a 6-year-old boy in Chicago. The swastikas being put on a deli in New York City and other forms of harassment. We are showing that there are other ways to deal with this. And Wayne State University as a campus has always been a campus of understanding and really a campus of tolerance. And so we want to just make sure that that is highlighted and that is affirmed as well.
All right. Well, we're looking forward to that tomorrow night. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me and bringing some perspective. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for having us.